So the big idea here is, why is it that we treat data centers as a whole bunch of little computers? Why isn't it one giant computer? Ben has written a bunch of white papers on this, and we're getting to the point now where we can start to realize that. So to kind of start out about this, let's go about it from what an operating system is and why that's important. So I'm going to draw a beautiful stack diagram here where we've got a kernel here on the bottom. And on top of that, we have a user LAN with something like an init and a cron, some important things like grep, the ability to do user accounts.
Which bit is it about?
What?
Which bit is it about?
I'm getting there. Let me draw my beautiful stack diagram here. And then kind of at the next level here, we've got what you normally see as the user interface. For those who went to a better CS school than I did, I'm sure you'd like to point out that I've made a whole bunch of, I'm going to call it, generalities here. This isn't what really an operating system is. Somebody would throw the book at me. Christos would fail me. Yes, I'm aware of this fact. But let's talk about this from what we can do from a Mesos world. So in the Mesos world, Mesos is a kernel. And then on top of a kernel, we have pretty much one-to-ones over here. We've got Marathon, which does our init. We've got Kronos that does cron. We've got a wonderful Mesos CLI that everybody loves to use.
Does it do grep?
No, but distributed grep is ridiculous.
How ridiculous? Isn't that what
As
like
opposed to distributed sleep?
everything is doing?
The distributed sleep is the best application we have. Come on now. Mesos CLI here. And then, unfortunately, we have a bit of a question mark here over in user accounts, but we're getting there. So then in the user interface section, we have a web interface, aka the visualizer, that I'm sure everybody has seen and been in complete awe of up to this point. So if we take a look at this stack here, what we're starting to see is one-to-one relation between an operating system on a single host and an operating system that we can run across your data center. Mesos gives us all of the scheduling needs that we have, and then we can start to put our frameworks and tools on top of it to give people that experience. But as I'm sure you've all realized, these are a bunch of Legos, and everybody hates getting a box of Legos without any instructions. So this goes into what DCOS is. So let me erase these stack diagrams and do some new, more beautiful stack diagrams. Yes. It's nothing but stack diagrams all the way down.
It's a nut joke.
Okay, so here's where the cloud comes in. So we've got a cloud at the bottom of our stack, because the cloud is where we get the physical machines that our data center runs on top of. And then on top of this, we have what I'm going to describe as a system image. The system image, for those who are technologically minded, is a CoreOS image. CoreOS is a super stripped down version of Linux. You can kind of think of it just like the BIOS on your computer. It does a little bit more, but that's the general idea. So what we're going to do is take a config that says what it takes to build up the DCOS, and I'm going to call this the DCOS distro. And we're going to inject that into CoreOS. So when CoreOS boots up, it's going to have this DCOS distro config that goes and splats everything that we need to run DCOS on top of the image. At that point, we will have full control of all of our own packaging, so on and so forth. So the cloud piece here is we need to be able to create instances on top of a cloud. That is what Mike and Michael are working on at the moment. The ability for us to generate the environment that we need on top of the cloud provider. We then have a system image, which is kind of the next step up, and that is what Jeremy and, where did Jeremy go? Anyways, Jeremy and Cody and Lucas are working on. And the idea here is we're going to take this distro in and we'll be able to start up a single DCOS node to go and create the rest of the cluster. So then on top of the system image, we have a DCOS CLI. If nobody has figured it out yet, I have a big thing for CLIs. The DCOS CLI is kind of a meta package loader that lets us go and add functionality as we see fit. The most important functionality that we're going to get here is the one thing, even better, the one thing I didn't cover on what an operating system is, we need to be able to install things. If you can't install something, why does it matter? So the DCOS CLI is providing something called a package repository. It goes on top of that. That is the package repository of everything anybody would possibly want to run on their new DCOS computer. So for example, that includes Marathon, that includes Mesos DNS, will include HDFS, Cassandra, Kafka, both data center services and specific programs used that you need to do to control your cluster. So we have a CLI. The CLI lets us install things on our system. The package repository gives us the metadata that we need to install those things. And then we have packages for all of the important pieces, like Marathon and Chronos and HDFS. Lots of boxes everywhere. So at this point in time, we've got a way to create the instances on the cloud. We've got a way to take over those instances and make them into our nodes in our cluster. We have a way to control it from the command line, because all of us are neckbeards like me. We have a package repository to actually to give the metadata so we can figure out how to install things. And we have some services that everybody is interested in. The last most important bit is what John is putting together, which is the bright green flashing lights. Actually, much more useful than that. The usability. What's up?
Barely.
Oh, come on. It's for the neckbeards not like me to actually figure out how to run their computer, the OS X desktop. And I'm out of room.
So when are we going to ship DCOS X?
Hopefully 10 years after DCOS.
Okay.
So in 2025, we're going to be shipping DCOS Next X.
Think about how big your
But don't we want to release often? So shouldn't it be 10 months?
Oh, good call. I like it. Okay, so that is kind of what DCOS is we are wrapping all of these components up into a single package so that instead of having a box of Legos that comes without instructions and maybe has bricks that you don't care about, we're going to give you the instructions on how to build a spaceship inside the box. So, who has questions? I know that most of us have gotten pieces of this so far, but who would like a deep dive on any of these pieces? If not, this is awesome. Okay.
So I have a quick question. Taking a bit of a devil's advocate approach at this being a full OS compared to an old OS also provides things like cross-process communication, memory management, mapping, all sorts of stuff like that.
messages. Works great.
Yeah, the process, framework messages.
Yep.
Memory management is Mesos resource management.
Yep.
What else you got?
So if I'm writing a Ruby on Rails app, and I'm running it via Marathon.
Well, so kind of like it required someone to learn how to write a program new when they started on PDPs. So too do you need to start to learn how to write a distributed application if you want those types of functionality on top of DCOS. We're providing Marathon as a base level so that you don't need the man, the legend. We're providing the base functionality through Marathon, so you don't need to screw around with it if you want to operate in the old world. But if you want to write your apps to address the new paradigms, you can be provided all of those things. And it's a little hard to put Slack over that given the network boundaries and things like that. It does require a little bit more thought into, you don't get mmap immediately, for example.
So part of my motivation for that is it seems like there's a growing number of people that are jabbing at Docker for all of the things that Docker takes away from you that's a normal Linux OS group. And I think we should be very clear up front what we provide and what we don't.
Agreed.
And if you're looking for this thing, instead check out this type of stuff.
We've
Because
also
a lot of
been
people are
spending-
complaining about like Unix secrets and all sorts of things that you normally expect in a Unix environment. They're effectively crippled or removed from your access.
Right. I think the other point is that we are, from an architectural perspective, trying as hard as we can to stick to the OS paradigm. We had a conversation earlier today about user permissions and what that means. And I don't know what's going on in Adam's mind, but we've been pushing pretty hard for it to match the paradigm that everybody is used to. Your file system permissions, you have an owner, you have a group, you have everyone, and then how does that work inside the system? So for example, you could potentially have your own user directory that you do things in, that kind of stuff. So far, from an architectural perspective, sticking as close as humanly possible to the paradigms that are in the OS hasn't led us wrong. And that's kind of where we're going. The DCOS CLI or the Mesos CLI took the core utilities and just replicated them on top of DCOS. And so far, it's been a pretty good paradigm. So that's kind of where we've been going with that.
Where/how will DCOS Web UI run?
Yes. So the DCOS Web UI is just static HTML and JavaScript. It'll be interacting with a bunch of services inside your data center. There will be the provisioning module, for example. There will be Mesos State. There's going to be the frameworks. It will be probably run on top of the masters via a static web server that will have Mesos DNS do the locations on. Anybody else? Oh, Michael's got a question.
It's not really a question. Can you just describe how Mesos modules works in the context of this stuff?
Okay, so there is, Kapil is there, so he's going to keep me honest. There is a spectrum of Mesos modules. At the moment, we are talking about Mesos doing nothing more than being a process runner for Python modules that we need to give functionality to. So Cody is working on some modules that will provide the ability for us to update Mesos config in real time. So you don't need to go SSH to all of the boxes. You say, I would like to roll out this config across my cluster, go do it. And so all we're doing is making it so that we don't need 50 systemd units. Mesos, when it starts up, brings up the config process and binds to libprocess so that we have a REST endpoint that we can talk to, and that's the extent of it. There are some more in-depth modules that are going to be a big part of this story, however, like the stuff that Nicholas is working on, which is the oversubscription modules, where they're ingesting all of the metrics from Mesos to be able to do oversubscription metrics and that kind of stuff. There's the isolation module stuff, another big one that's really closely tied in with Mesos itself. So at a high level, the modules give us the ability to add functionality into Mesos. At the moment, for DCOS v1, It's pretty much just going to be Mesos as the process manager for the box. Your Mesos slave process will manage these other processes that we need to run it. But in the near future, it's going to move forward to having quite a bit of functionality. The new schedulers, the oversubscription stuff, the authentication modules, that kind of thing.
Interesting. So, sorry, so is it only on startup? Is there another way to start up Mesos modules?
Only on startup.
Only on startup.
They can't be dynamically loaded on demand.
I don't know, Kapil, can they?
Not the ones that we have done so far.
Okay.
You know, like Mesos cannot be configured after the fact.
Right.
That's kind of this modules could be, but there's no way of there's no mechanism to give Mesos configuration after it's started.
And that's kind of the core problem that Cody is working on right now, which is how do you configure this thing? Because it's not just loading a module in, it's configuring it after the fact as well.
Also note there are things like, so because we're restarting Mesos Slave, that doesn't mean that your Memcache is going to die. All of your processes, even when we're upgrading or changing Mesos Slave, should stay alive. When we upgrade and change Mesos Master, all you see is there's a failover.
Assuming that the framework has checkpointing turned on.
You're not. Mesos always has checkpointing turned on.
The framework doesn't necessarily.
The framework doesn't necessarily, but they should.
Well,
Not all frameworks.
some
anyways.
frameworks may choose not to.
Yep.
But
If
in
they
that
have
case,
not-
they don't care if the task disappeared.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Or if they don't have like their own state tracking, so like if the framework goes away, they may want to make sure that when the framework comes back up, all of the tasks have already been killed. But that's implementation details.
Exactly. Connor?
Yeah. Do you have more information at this point about what tiers of like things we're selling?
What are we selling?
There's a free version, then there's like presumably some like paid tiers. Do we have like that settled yet, or is it still?
It is definitely still an open issue. At the moment, the thinking is that we'll have 3 tiers. We'll have a community edition that is 100% open source, aka what you get right now. We will have a free edition, which is going to be under a non-permissive commercial license. Which basically means we control full ownership of it, but we're letting you use it as, we're granting you a single-use license to it. Whether we allow people to see the source or not is a separate question there. There will probably be a bit where we allow people to see source, but not use it in anything. And then the third tier there is the Enterprise Edition. So between the free and Enterprise Edition, what you can think of at the moment, and again, this needs to get worked out, is the free edition is everything that we're releasing at the end of this quarter. The Enterprise Edition is going to include the Kerberos authentication module stuff, the oversubscription stuff, the new scheduler, that kind of thing in it, and then on top of that, the non-feature bits, which are support and getting your stuff fixed and doing POCs and that kind of thing. Okay, anybody else? Going once? Oh.
I have a couple of things. So, have we thought through what the how administrators will find the masters? Like I'm a user of the DCOS CLI. What do I point at?
That is still something that we're spending some time working with right now. There's a couple different options we can have. I don't have a good answer for it. A feature that we're going to be introducing next quarter is this idea of a centralized CLI server that you set the config for all CLI clients everywhere in your cluster, and they get that config whether they like it or not. And so that will be that. That said, the core of your question, it goes back to the web UI one, which is once the masters move, how the hell do you give somebody a URL to figure out where to go? And that one is one that's a little outstanding that we need to sort down. I wouldn't be amazed if for Q1 we start using ELBs with the CloudFormation templates, and then when a master comes up, it registers, and when it goes away, it removes itself.
For scaling, scaling up the number of what do we call them? Nodes.
Nodes.
Scaling up the number of nodes, or the number of masters potentially, if we can do
Yeah.
that, things that then. How do you see that working after the system is up?
So it would be a CLI command. John is putting together a beautiful UI on this right now, which is, so we are modeling everything after resource groups. So at the high level, there's going to be 2 resource groups. There will be a master resource group and a slave resource group. And those resource groups describe everything to create those things. So for the slaves, it will have the config locked in. It will have the instance type. It will have the VPC it launches in. And you just increment 1, and it then creates that new instance. That new instance can go find the master, join the cluster, move on down the road. And so it'll be, a slider. You slide it to the right, suddenly you have more nodes. You slide it to the left, suddenly you have fewer nodes.
Is the thinking that the CLI or web UI would, when it tries to issue that command, does it find a master and communicate with a Mesos module, or what? I mean,
It will be a Mesos module called the provisioning module that, for all intents and purposes, is nothing more than a REST endpoint.
so I guess how does the where's the communication path? Is it from
through-
web UI directly to this REST endpoint exposed by the
Yes.
module?
Exposed by lib process. So it will be an HTTP endpoint that is listening on the same port as the Mesos master.
Oh, so it'd be like 50/50 / provisioner or something
Exactly.
like that.
Exactly right.
And note before that, the initial provisioning, when we say, hey, this is an AWS cluster, it needs to inject all of the stuff to provision future nodes into the master plan.
Right.
Yeah.
Or we'll allow you to add it in the web UI.
Yeah.
Either way, configuration will need to occur.
Yes. It needs to land there, it should be seamless.
Exactly right. Yep. Okay. One more time. Last call. Okay, awesome. If you guys honestly have questions about DCOS, come up and poke me. Abe was like, dude, I have no idea what the hell is going on here. Can you come and help me out? So
Yeah.
that was put together from his request. So yes, sir.
I have another question.
Oh,
Sorry.
Yeah, what's up?
Where configuration state? So we're propagating configurations, but where does the state get stored?
So there will be files in a file server somewhere that I'm going to be able to download.
Or
So
HDFS.
that assumes you have a working cluster.
There will be
Having
files
said
in
I
a
have working
file.
cluster.
There will be files accessible over HTTP that Cody can get.
Yes.
Okay, so if we provide configuration via the web UI, then that goes into this file system. And
So-
additionally, the web UI will read from.
So
Yes.
what my current plan is, although this is still in flux and completely being designed, is so in Magic Web UI you press buttons and say I want this C groups, I want these modules enabled. That will generate a config tarball and throw it up in a file server somewhere. Then what we do is we tell a Mesos deployer module, hey, roll this out across all of my cluster. That'll go to every slave, fetch the tarball, extract it, and then swap it into place, and do intelligent things if there's failures.